Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This series is designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. To keep up with all things digital, please subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Jennifer Ziegel, a partner at Kleinberg LLC, Ross Bruck, a principal of Estate Genie, and Justin Brown, a partner at Troutman Pepperell Hamilton Sanders LLP, with today's topic.
Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. I'm Justin, and I'm here with my co-hosts Jen and Ross. Today, we are lucky to have Joel Revill, CEO of Two Ocean Trust in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Two Ocean Trust is the first comprehensive digital asset wealth management platform in the United States. They are fully equipped to hold and custody digital assets for individuals and fiduciaries, and they hold fiduciary powers under Wyoming law so that they can serve as trustees of trusts that hold digital assets. Joel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it.
So, Joel, how did you become interested in blockchain and cryptocurrency?
There were two different paths that led me there, private sector and public sector. In Wyoming, there was a group of individuals who banded together to create the Wyoming Blockchain Task Force, and that led to some early legislative work in the state of Wyoming. And that eventually became, through one of the works of the legislature, became a permanent committee within the Wyoming legislature. It's called the Wyoming Select Committee on Blockchain and Digital Innovation. That was following the work of that group and eventually became one of the members of that select committee. There are three members appointed by Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon, and I was one of those three. So I've been pulled down the rabbit hole by the work on the legislative side, and I'm sure we'll be talking about some of the laws that Wyoming has blazed a trail in creating in the space.
How long ago was that formed? When did you start, and when did Wyoming start to foster this interest in crypto and blockchain?
Yeah, so that was has been now 4 legislative sessions. So about 4 years ago, Wyoming first began to pass what is now a total of 24 different laws that address blockchain technology and digital assets. I have been on that committee now this will be my 3rd year. And on that committee. So, and then Justin, back to your initial question too, that the second sort of way that I've been drawn into the digital asset space is on the private sector side. You mentioned Two Ocean Trust. We have received a somewhat unique blessing from our regulator, which is a no action letter that was written by the Wyoming Division of Banking, our regulator, allowing us to provide qualified custody under state and federal law for digital assets. And we've added digital assets to our generational wealth management platform about a year and a half ago. And so we've been busy on the private sector side as well.
So Joel, before we dive into everything that you guys do at Two Ocean Trust, can you just in simple terms explain how cryptocurrency works on a blockchain?
The important piece to understand for cryptocurrency is the distributed ledger technology. And distributed ledger technology is simply multiple ledgers, thousands of ledgers around the world, simultaneously validating in a decentralized fashion transactions that are occurring. And a type of distributed ledger technology is blockchain. That's what blockchain technology is. Think of it as Google Sheets. We all use Google Sheets, and you have multiple people that can enter information in Google Sheets. Just think of it as a big Google Sheets with thousands of users around the world, all agreeing on what is entered into that spreadsheet. And the really important thing about that technology is that it permits transactions to occur between two counterparties who would have otherwise had no reason to trust each other. And it's this sort of trustless transaction technology that is unlocking a massive disintermediation in the financial services sector. And cryptocurrency is one piece of that. Cryptocurrency is essentially the storage and exchange of value utilizing this distributed ledger technology.
Well, thank you for that brief overview on cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. And for those interested in learning more, we do have some earlier episodes in our podcast library that take a little bit of a deeper dive on blockchain and cryptocurrency. So, Joel, moving back a little bit to just generally the state of the law in Wyoming, I know Caitlin Long has been at the forefront in really spearheading a lot of the initiatives to help the legislatures really move the needle and create all of the different laws regarding blockchain and cryptocurrency and recognizing decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. Did you know Caitlin before, really getting involved in the Wyoming legislature committee?
Yeah, that's a great story, Jen. Actually, we found out 30 years later that Caitlin and I played in the Wyoming State tennis tournament as high schoolers. But we just realized that at a recent Blockchain Select Committee meeting. So we both grew up in Wyoming and had left. Both of us had actually similar paths. We were both on Wall Street for a number of years. But we were reconnected through the Blockchain Select Committee, and Caitlin was really the driving force, along with a couple of others, for that initial group that I mentioned, the Blockchain Task Force. And I was fortunate enough to be added later by the governor, and that's when I really got to reconnect and get to know Caitlin.
Excellent. It's a small world.
Yes, it's especially when you live in Wyoming.
Yes, and in the crypto community.
Yes.
No less.
Joel, you mentioned Wall Street. Would you mind walking our listeners through your journey from Wall Street to Wyoming? Because it's not an everyday path that
right.
Many Wall Street alum take.
And probably even less traveled path is Wyoming to Wall Street and then back to Wyoming. So as I mentioned before, grew up in Wyoming. My first job was with JP Morgan. I was joined the investment banking program back in the 90s and worked in corporate finance for a number of years, assisting JP Morgan's corporate clients with mergers and acquisitions and raising capital, et cetera. And then I transitioned a few years later to investment management and was in institutional investment management, most recently as a portfolio manager at Citadel. And then I returned back to my home state of Wyoming with an idea of creating a new firm that would position itself in front of all of these unique advantages that Wyoming has to offer, both in traditional financial markets as well as the digital asset markets. And that plus the skiing and fishing are pretty good here too. So were the reasons to bring me back to Wyoming.
But so when you say you were positioning yourself with the Wyoming advantages, I assume that was prior to Wyoming's emergence as a state who's trying to lead the blockchain communication and platform development.
It was very early on in Wyoming's positioning in the digital asset. So this was 2017 is when I left Citadel and started work on Two Ocean Trust a year later. So it was very early on in the digital asset push by Wyoming. I wasn't really sure at that time where it might lead, but Wyoming was squarely positioned in the more traditional financial area, especially around generational wealth management, trust and estates. And of course, Wyoming is known for having the lowest overall tax burden among the 50 U.S. states. Also very advantageous creditor protection and privacy laws in Wyoming. So a lot of advantages that lend themselves to traditional trust and estate and investment of these generational assets.
How did you come to use Two Ocean as the name for your company?
There is a place in the Teton Wilderness near Jackson Hole, and it's known as the Two Ocean Divide. And on Two Ocean Divide, a small creek, Two Ocean Creek, comes off of Two Ocean Plateau and splits right on the Continental Divide. And just about half of the creek heads west and becomes Pacific Creek, which ultimately drains into the Snake River, into the Columbia River, and into the Pacific Ocean. The other half of Two Ocean Creek splits east and becomes Atlantic Creek. which is the headwaters for the Yellowstone, the Missouri, the Mississippi, and out to the Atlantic Ocean. So this two-ocean plateau drains about half of the water to the Atlantic Ocean and the other half to the Pacific Ocean. Very unique and remote part of the Teton Wilderness here, a favorite place of mine when I was growing up. And then also has a second meaning for our clients who, a lot of our clients are global. We have clients in overseas and sort of position ourselves in Wyoming to address clients on both sides of the Atlantic and Pacific.
You guys are unique in that you are one of the first trust companies to custody digital assets. How have you found digital assets fitting into traditional estate planning for your clients?
That's a great question, because there's somewhat of a conflict between the ethos that surrounds digital assets and the sort of basis of traditional estate planning. And I'll go a little deeper into that. So with traditional estate planning, in order to form a trust, as you all know, there are sort of three things that are required: the grantor, the person setting up the trust, the beneficiaries, and then also this third party, the trustee, who gains control of those assets. So to unlock some of these better benefits of traditional trust and estate planning, the grantor must separate dominion and control. Control must go to this trustee. That somewhat flies in the face of this ethos of crypto being a self-sovereign asset, not your keys, not your coins. And so we find it a very interesting intersection between these two worlds right now to try and create a solution for clients who very much subscribe to this ethos of it being a self-sovereign asset, but who are also recognizing that while self-sovereignty, while being your own bank is a wonderful thing, if something should happen to you, if you're incapacitated or you die or something happens to your keys, that value is gone forever. And so helping clients think of the wealth that has been created through digital assets beyond their lifespan is an interesting exercise in what we do every day.
Are you seeing digital assets being used for multi-generational wealth? Are you seeing the generational wealth strategies in planning?
Increasingly so, although I think it's very, very early in that mindset. And a lot of our clients are young, not surprisingly, and not thinking about generational wealth. But I think while there is this inherent friction that I mentioned before between digital assets and traditional trust and estate laws, there are actually some inherent attributes of digital assets and Bitcoin in particular that lend itself very well to longer term generational wealth planning. So if you kind of think about generational wealth planning, typically this is wealth that is being passed on to children or grandchildren or to a family's philanthropic interests. And there's a very similar investment thesis there to endowment style investing, where you are preserving the corpus, you're preserving the principal and hoping to grow that principal over time at a rate which exceeds inflation, so that you can cover the cash flows that the family may need and still preserve the principal. What I think is unique about digital assets and Bitcoin, or the store of value part of digital assets, is that you have two characteristics that lend themselves very well to this investment style. The first is limited supply. With Bitcoin, we know that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin outstanding, and we know exactly what the money supply looks like of Bitcoin, the issuance of Bitcoin. It's limited, it's finite, it's pre-programmed, and it can't be changed. For the next 12 months, we know that new Bitcoin issued will roughly be about 1.8%. And that number is going to go down until it eventually reaches zero. This limited supply, when you contrast that against other potential investments, especially around fiat currency or US dollar-based investments, where the issuance of the currency is double digits over the last few years compounded, and the risk of your wealth being debased over time by monetary inflation, makes digital assets very attractive. The second thing about digital assets is the persistent lack of correlation between the prices of these assets and traditional investment securities such as equities and bonds. If you look over the last 3, 5, 10-year periods at Bitcoin relative to fixed income and equities, there's a very low correlation, 0.2 to 0.3 correlation to a 60-40 blended portfolio of equity and fixed income, which means that an introduction of Bitcoin into a diversified investment portfolio, because of that lack of correlation, it actually reduces the volatility of the portfolio over time, which then has a great impact on risk-adjusted returns. Those two things, the sort of finite and known supply and persistent lack of correlation and potential increase in risk-adjusted returns, make a lot of sense for an asset class being considered as part of an overall generational wealth planning strategy.
All of that seems to make sense. But every trust officer who is listening to you talk is thinking to themselves, yeah, but private keys. Why have to worry about private keys? That is just a huge risk that I'm not willing to take. I'm sure you've talked to many other trust companies and many other trust officers and traditional banks who have that mindset. Am I wrong in that?
No.
That's the general sentiment out there, right?
That's correct.
So what about it did you see that you said, that's okay, I'm going to take on that risk and I'm going to minimize that risk, and it's going to be worth this new opportunity, this different line of business that I'm willing to engage in?
Two things, really. The first was it was essential that we have in place what Wyoming has done. And it started first with the legislation. Wyoming has now passed 24 different laws over the past 4 legislative sessions that define blockchain technology and define digital assets within our law. The most important of which was that digital assets were reverse wired back into Wyoming's existing property laws. So there is clarity about what exactly digital assets are and how they are treated under property law in Wyoming. That was a first very critical step. And subsequent to that, we had a regulator, the Wyoming Division of Banking, who was willing to interpret those laws and create a regulatory framework around our activities that gave us comfort in moving forward in a regulated sense. So with the legal and regulatory clarity similar to that of traditional assets like stocks and bonds. Wyoming has also very recently stood up a chancery court. December 1st of last year, Wyoming opened a new court that will address, like most chancery courts, business and trust matters, but it's also specifically designed to begin to build precedent around digital assets and digital asset disputes. So that's the first and sort of most important thing that needed to be in place for us to feel comfortable serving as a fiduciary around these assets. The second was a somewhat unique position that we're in as a financial institution regulated by the Wyoming Division of Banking. We are both a chartered trust company and can serve as a corporate trustee, and we are a qualified custodian under state and federal law. And it's that combination of both that gives us comfort that as long as we have the ability to access the key and control the private key, that will allow us to discharge our fiduciary duty as a trustee of those underlying assets.
A lot of trust companies and other institutional outfits have minimum, account value threshold requirements to invest. Do you have any similar requirements?
We do, Jen. We're private client focused and target high net worth individuals and family offices with a high level of personal interaction with our clients. We have a $10 million minimum investable assets threshold for clients at Two Ocean. Not that we are trying to exclude clients, but it's that it would be difficult for us to deliver the kind of personal service and advice that we do in a retail model. So we really steer towards the high net worth and family office clients.
Do you have any restrictions on the types of cryptocurrency or digital assets that could be invested? For instance, are you able to custody NFTs at this time?
We do, Jen, and we work together with our regulator, the Wyoming Division of Banking, and as well have policies and procedures, board-adopted policies and procedures that prescribe which digital assets we are able to custody and therefore also serve as trustee, and which we're not. And we have thresholds around liquidity, market cap, and importantly also that our technology partners, our sub-custodians, have the ability to store the cryptographic keys for the protocols that we accept within their storage technology.
Can we dive in on that, on the technology of the sub-custodians and how you integrate with your platform? And we'd just love to hear about the process in general.
Sure, Ross. For purposes of custody, we are the custodian of record. Two Ocean Trust is the custodian. So all of the KYC, BSA, AML work and liability resides with us. Books and records, asset reporting, tax reporting, all reside with us. We, however, utilize partners across the board in both traditional financial assets and digital assets to assist us with things like sub-custody of digital assets. So we have multiple partners as sub-custodians, Anchorage, Fidelity, Genesis, and we work with these sub-custodians to store the cryptographic keys for our clients. How that works, how we select, it's somewhat up to the client, but we each of those sub-custodians have their own strengths, and we sort of help the clients determine which is the best solution given their particular need, whether it is the protocol which they are storing can vary, the strengths and weaknesses vary from technology partner to partner, whether you're borrowing and lending the digital assets, whether there are derivative trading strategies involved, and so on.
A lot of financial institutions are very concerned about security, and they're hesitant to hold cryptocurrencies because of the security protocols that are necessary in order to protect private keys. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys do or your sub-custodians do to maintain the security of private keys?
Yeah, it's interesting. If I compare the security protocols that are in place around our digital assets held in custody or managed for our clients relative to the traditional securities that are managed on behalf of our clients, there is almost no comparison. The security around the digital assets, the private keys for digital assets, is far superior in just about every way. That's somewhat of an irony to me, the concern that therefore exists about digital assets. So I'll just run you through an example. So in order for us to access the private keys of one of our clients, we go through a verification process that entails multiple biometric authentication procedures, voice recognition, thumbprint recognition, and facial recognition. That is done on an app on our phone that is accessible only by and can be downloaded only by the quorum of senior officers within our firm. And once one of our senior officers has biometrically approved a transaction, it then kicks out to the quorum and another officer has to independently go through that same process. Very importantly, in this, there are no usernames and no passwords and no humans on the other side of that authentication taking place. That is all done algorithmically by our technology partners. Once that happens, I'm speaking now specifically about one of our partners, Anchorage. They have cryptographic keys that are stored in HSMs, hardware security modules, that are always offline, always cold, is a term used around cryptographic storage, cold storage. An arm receives the information once we've gone through that quorum biometric authentication. A physical arm receives the instructions. That arm then disconnects itself from the internet, physically moves to the hardware security module, which is a special purpose piece of hardware designed specifically for storing cryptographic key information, connects to that HSM, creates the transaction that needs to be printed to the blockchain within that HSM. Those instructions are then put on the arm. The arm disconnects from the HSM and reconnects to the internet, and the instructions are sent. At no time during that process was our client's private key ever exposed to the internet. So it's quite a James Bond-like process and security and storage through which that goes. And then, as I said at the outset, if you contrast that to how traditional securities or cash is handled by financial institutions in the U.S., really the more vulnerable side of our business is clearly on the fiat and traditional security side.
So there's just this giant room somewhere in Wyoming with all these HSMs and an arm that attaches and detaches from the internet. Do I understand that correctly?
Not necessarily in Wyoming, and we don't know where those locations are, but otherwise, yes, you've got it right, Ross.
Now, you mentioned that there's no human oversight for this algorithm that's pulling this information. Technology is inherently flawed. So what would happen do you have recovery protocols if there was a glitch in the code or some other snafu?
Yes, that's correct. We do. And there is also, to the extent that the algorithm detects that there has not been a proper biometric authentication, or it even has the ability to detect if there is coercion taking place. So, for example, someone is being held at gunpoint and being asked to do facial recognition. The facial recognition software has the ability to detect perhaps if there's coercion. In all of these instances, it kicks the process out of the algorithm and a human is brought in. In addition, we have, on our side of it, obviously, we have multiple senior officers who are part of this quorum, and we have policies and procedures that create checks and balances from our side as well.
So in a non-glitch scenario, what is the minimal or general transaction time if somebody wanted to, make a distribution or a transfer or, a directive to sell some of their portfolio holdings to go through this process and then conduct those trades or transactions?
Typically a matter of minutes, Jen. It depends on the underlying blockchain protocol. For example, blocks of transactions are printed to the Bitcoin blockchain on average about every 10 minutes. Other protocols are typically much faster than that. But typically it's a matter of a few minutes for us to biometrically authenticate and transact on behalf of clients. Actually, it's a very good point. That's another significant difference versus traditional securities or fiat currency, where oftentimes it's a matter of a couple of days before we have wire transfers or securities purchases where transactions have taken place and funds have settled. In addition, as you know, those markets are subject to weekdays, market hours, closed on holidays, whereas the digital asset markets are 24/7, 365 days a year.
I want to circle back to another protocol item that you mentioned before. You use the acronyms KYC and AML, which is Know Your Client, and anti-money laundering regulations. The anti-money laundering process must be extremely difficult when we're talking about digital assets, and in particular cryptocurrency. Can you walk me through your thinking there and how you've come to terms with, it's probably an imperfect protocol, but nevertheless, you need to reach a resolution. Otherwise, you would never have a digital asset client to begin with. So can you talk a little bit about that?
With regards to the clients themselves, it's no different than any other KYC process that we go through. We run the same sort of thorough background checks and continual monitoring of our clients' activities that we're required to do for any financial transactions under the USA Patriot Act. As it relates to the crypto itself, that's where it gets a bit more challenging. There are a few different services out there that forensically track where the crypto has come from prior to the transaction and sort of looks backwards to see where that crypto has been. And we do employ those services to look backwards into where the crypto has come from in a sort of audit trail way. This is all under our regulatory oversight by our bank regulator, the Division of Banking here, as well as we have a third-party audit firm that helps us with creating those policies and procedures as well.
It sounds from everything that you've said that you guys in Wyoming are really on the forefront of everything in this space. What should we have on our radar screen for more things to come in Wyoming and in blockchain and cryptocurrency?
One of the more interesting things that the Wyoming legislature has recently passed is the DAO LLC legislation. And DAO is Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Little known fact, Wyoming was actually the state that created the original LLC. And it was several years before any of the other states had adopted the LLC. Wyoming is, again, sort of blazed a trail in this LLC area with the DAO. The DAO is a concept that I think everyone is still wrapping their head around the possibility of what it could be. It's still an evolving concept, but the idea generally is that it's a self-executing entity in the same way that if you think about smart contracts, which is a part of blockchain technology, or it's something that blockchain technology is enabling, which is a smart contract is the ability for two counterparties to enter into a transaction and to have some code or software that determines the outcome of that contract and automatically or self-executes that contract. Think of that now at an entity level. So now you have code or software that determines what a company does and how a company fulfills its obligations. That's what a DAO is. And as an owner of a token in a DAO, you have the ability to also determine the outcome of that company through voting your tokens. And so governance and ownership come together in even greater alignment than they do currently under kind of traditional partnership or corporate structures.
How long do you think we're away from having a smart trust that would be controlled in a similar manner to a DAO?
That's a great idea. And I don't know how long we are away from it. I suspect that it will take lawmakers and regulators a long time to catch up to the concept. But I think that it makes all the sense in the world that you would have self-executing trusts. And I think that would also have a wonderful effect on our society of enabling more people, and especially those who may not have had the financial education or the financial wherewithal to establish trusts, to do so in a much lower cost way and bring the benefits that right now only the higher income percentage of our population has access to, all these benefits that come from our trust laws. And I think a self-executing trust is potentially a way to democratize those benefits to a wider swath of our society.
Well, as initiatives develop on smart trusts in the future, we'll definitely have you back to discuss it further. But for now, what else should we know about your trust administration services?
Well, we serve as a corporate trustee for Wyoming Trust. We also assist families that want to establish private trust companies in Wyoming. Private trust company is where an entity is established to serve as trustee for families' trust. And Wyoming is a somewhat unique state in that both regulated and unregulated private trust companies exist here, which the unregulated version means that a private trust company can be set up without regulatory capital and without the burden of oversight and compliance that comes with a regulated trust company like ourselves. So we help families design and administer private trust companies as well. And in terms of the assets that are used to fund trusts, we help clients with both onshore and offshore trusts and special assets, including obviously digital assets, as we've talked about today.
So for any of our listeners who want to get in touch with you or learn more about 2Ocean, what's the best way to reach you or find out more?
Our website would be a great place to start, Ross, www.2ocean.com. And contact information on that is available on that website with our team to the extent folks would like to reach out and learn more.
Joel, thank you so much for spending time with us today and telling us all about 2Ocean and some of the other initiatives going on in Wyoming. We really appreciate your support of our podcast and helping educate our listeners on everything going on in the fiduciary world with cryptocurrency. So many thanks on behalf of myself, Justin, and Ross. Catch us next time on the Digital Planning Podcast, where we'll continue to explore all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Digital Planning Podcast, the podcast designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is not intended nor should be relied upon as legal advice, nor is it creating any attorney-client relationship with a listener and the hosts or guests. The information provided is only for educational and informational purposes, and the information provided will likely change.